really as part of COVID-19. We had already had this, like where we were funding the Law Foundation. We have other partners like Project Sentinel that are doing the legal work that focuses exactly on this group. But the county's also invested another, I would say, about $4 million in legal defense for folks right now. So we have a network of nonprofit partners that are assisting with that subject specifically.
Okay, and so I guess I'm wanting to know too, are they able to get temporary housing as they're going through this process? Because that seemed to be
I don't actually think so, but I'll ask Scott to reach out to our partners, and maybe Hillary can do a little research on that too.
Awesome, thank you.
Good questions and good ideas. Kelsey?
Thank you. I would just like to encourage potentially to think about location as part of improving quality of life in terms of the siting of services. My experience as a provider in Palo Alto is that even though we have quite an array of services in terms of mental health services, jobs programs, substance use disorder programs, there is really quite a limited capacity of shelter beds and supportive housing in northern Santa Clara County. And transportation is routinely a barrier to unhoused people accessing services at the VA Palo Alto, Stanford Healthcare. So I do think that thinking about where we're siting these services is important, not just in terms of the geography, in terms of what part of the county they're in, but also what kind of neighborhood is the site in. What I have seen observing how we've cited things like safe parking or shelters is that we tend to put them in undesirable locations that might be contaminated or might be lack access to any kind of public transit or lack access to services. So I do think that that's a big part of quality of life, is what neighborhood you're in. Let's see. And in terms of like making certain neighborhoods an option, I do wonder if part of this, especially in regard to ensuring that community spaces are safe and welcoming, is maybe thinking about how to do like a culture shift or public education campaign around unhoused people, because I do think there's a public perception that unhoused people are dangerous. I read today that a Cupertino planning commissioner was posting about suggesting that the unhoused people were planted there. So yeah, I think potentially some public education. I don't know what form that could take, but just something to think about in terms of communities' willingness to welcome unhoused people into their spaces.
Thank you, Kelsey. Okay, I'm going to go to Councilmember Esparza, then Councilmember O'Neill, then Brian Franklin, and Anthony, you have the last word of the committee on this, the last questions and comments. There you go.
I'll be super quick. I wanted to second the earlier suggestion about Caltrans, and wanted to add a component about Caltrans land. And I bring this up because it took the city of San Jose over a year and a lot of bureaucratic wrangling to get the sites where we're putting on the tiny homes. One of them is in my district, and it took so long before we could move on it. And if they could develop some policies that would make it easier for other cities so they wouldn't have to go through what we did, I think it'd be a big help. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. They're gonna love coming to us. Be awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Councilmember O'Neill.
Thank you. So a mention was made about VTA and transit. And last year when I was going to a number of meetings, obviously for agencies around the country, the issues with the challenges of dealing with the unhoused for the transit agencies is huge. So I was at the California Transit Association meeting last November, and actually a government affairs person from BART was weighing in on, there was panel, a lot of the major, the biggest counties in California, and she was claiming that there are hundreds of millions of dollars per, like she mentioned Orange, LA, Sacramento. She didn't have the number for Santa Clara handy, where I think it's related to that proposition that passed a few years ago, like kind of like the add-on super income tax for the very wealthy. And she was saying that counties have not been accessing those funds. And I was just, in terms of being able to increase mental health and substance use, if, do we know, are there funds that were collected through that initiative that we could be accessing?
Thank you. We'll take a look at that.
Okay.
That's
all right.
Horrifying, but good.
Okay.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that, Teresa.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, so thanks for setting up this task force. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I just have three, hopefully quick items, more of the first two being a support for that coalition. I think that's an absolutely wonderful idea. There's so many organizations that are in silos, and to have some commonality they can land on and support each other, I think will really help bring great services to the unhoused. The other part was, whoever mentioned it, was I think this goes to number 6, is the education of the community. And maybe it's even more targeted. I have just too many examples of permanent supportive housing, or we'll call them sanctioned encampments, where something occurs and all the red flags pop up and the community gets upset. And so if they could understand this is not going to devalue your property, these people are good people, they now have a place to call home. And so some kind of outreach and education to the community of what's occurring here. And then the last part is, I don't really see it anywhere, but my experience is that of these unhoused people, as we start to get them housed, and in a perfect world, they're all going to go somebody, but the reality is I bet 5 or 10% at any given time do not want to go into 4 walls for whatever reason. They're just mentally not there yet. And so what is going to happen to those people when that point in time comes where everyone's housed, but yet that small population just does not want to go? So I don't know what the solution is, but I think that would be very helpful to know how it's going to be dealt with. Is it the carrot or the stick? Hey, we got a nice 3 meals and 4 walls for you. Please go. You're going to get help. But what if they don't? So that small population that is, I think, always going to be there. What's going to happen to them?
Thank you. Thanks for all that, Brian. All right, Mr. King, you're it.
Okay, my first question was for you. Is it possible to ask Office of Supportive Housing staff to come in at a later date and explain how Vento McKinley is affecting the county during the pandemic? It's been touched upon by different people. And
Yeah.
my second question is for Reagan. Reagan, I understand that you guys are opening sanctioned encampments of some sort, like on Felipe Road and another site sometime in the near future. But has the city given true thought to doing something in the downtown area?
Reagan?
Hi, so we are not opening a sanctioned encampment. However, we are increasing some of our street-based support services. So during COVID, we have put out porta potties, hand washing stations. We've increased some mobile showers. We're about to increase our street outreach teams. We have been providing trash pickup and trash service and cleanups at about 60 plus encampments during COVID. No abatements, but just working with encampments to keep things clean and provide a level of trash service, but no formal sanctioned encampment. Perhaps at Felipe, what you might be thinking of is the site that Councilmember Esparza just mentioned. It's a Caltrans owned site, and we're currently constructing 40 tiny homes on that site at Felipe and 101.
Thank you for that. What I'd like to ask staff to do now is, can you go through the framework And thank you. This was really helpful. Great ideas, good questions, great comments, a lot for us to follow up on, which is awesome. I'm going to have the staff go through this piece. Then I'm going to go to public comment. Each person will get 2 minutes to speak. And then I'm going to come back to this group for discussion about the second item. But let me just say that will be public comment under item 2. All right. And I'm doing that because I know our public commenters have been on the line for a while. 2 has a few components to it, but we'll take you early before the staff reports. Okay, so Hillary, am I turning it back to you?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So we talked a little bit about this the last time, but I wanted to give you an overview of the framework again to refresh your memories. And then also we added one more data component to the framework. So the framework is a matrix of data and information that this task force could use as a tool in understanding the different types of housing programs and structures that could be put together for temporary housing, and the type of work that it takes, work and resource that it takes to implement permanent housing interventions, and using that as you think about what to recommend to the various jurisdictions that will receive your recommendation. So there are 7 data points in the framework, and I'll go through each of those and what they mean. The first is one-time startup costs per household. And that includes things like what it costs to purchase the land, what it costs to build or rehab a building, any furniture, fixtures and equipment, if we need to set up a site to pay that needs electricity and utilities because it's a blank, undeveloped piece of land, for example. All of those sort of one-time startup costs are included in that category. And then the way we got to the per household number was made some assumptions based on the number of people that could be housed on a nightly basis by that housing type. And some of the assumptions are based on projects that are actually in the works now. Other assumptions are based on the average of projects that have been developed recently or will be developed soon. And so that's how we came to those numbers. And you'll see on the framework chart that for each of the numerical items, there's also a bit of space for narrative to provide additional explanation about assumptions or other things that we think it's important that you consider and think about. The second column on the table is the development timeframe. So that is from the time we come up with the idea and identify a location, how long will it take before we can start putting people in that housing opportunity? The third column is the annual operating costs per household. And that is the supportive services like case management, the basic needs services like providing meals, if that's what happens at a site like that. It includes the operating costs for the facility, like utilities, garbage, staffing to keep a facility going 24/7. And if it's a program like a motel or a scattered site subsidy, the cost of the subsidy is factored into this column, the annual operating costs per household. The fourth column now, which is the new data point, is what would that program type, what do we think that program type might cost to serve one household for 20 years? So I will note that that's the cost in today's dollars. I didn't do any fancy inflation calculating. But the way we got to that number.
Sorry, I'm not seeing columns. I'm seeing like a framework overview with just icons. So.
Oh, yes. So I'm explaining what the data points are, and then we can move to the spreadsheet that actually has the columns. So the fourth data point is the cost for one household for 20 years. And we got to that by taking the low end of the range for the annual operating cost and multiplying that by 20, and then adding to that the low end of the one-time startup cost range. So that's the low end of the range for the cost to serve one household for 20 years. And then we did the same with the high end of the range. So the high end of the operating cost multiplied by 20, plus the high end of the one-time startup cost. And so that's how we got to the assumption of what this would take to implement this project, the amount of money per household it would take for 20 years. The next data point is the rate of exit to permanent housing. So for that program type, what do we expect in terms of the percentage of people who would leave that program type and move into permanent housing? And we don't include that for permanent supportive housing because when people move into permanent housing, they are permanently housed. The next data point is the rate of maintaining permanent housing for 1 year. And the way that we look at this actually is we take a look at the people who exited that program type a year ago, and from their year anniversary, did we see them return to the system accessing homeless services? So for that data point, a low percentage is good because we actually sort of look at it. The data that we have allows us to look at that in the inverse. And then our last piece of information is more narrative. So what are the things that you might consider about what it takes to scale that particular program type? At the end of the matrix, we also included a narrative list of, I think it's 4 or 5 categories that impact every single program type. And Antonina was adept in saying land seems to have an impact in every type of program we might consider, and that's very true. So land is one of the items on that list of considerations for all program types. So it is a spreadsheet. It's got a bit of information and it's very meaty. At the end of the spreadsheet, I also provided just the numbers so that you can have a tighter all-on-one-page look at what the costs are for each program type next to one another. So that's an overview of the framework. Supervisor Chavez, I'm not sure how deeply at this point you'd like to go into each of these individual rows.
You know, what I think would be of value, I know it feels a little like an eye chart to everybody. So and I know we sent it out like early. So if you are like me, it has to be expanded across a very big screen. Anyway, what I think would be of value is if you could just walk through them very briefly, so that folks understand what they are actually, and then just give the highlights. And I do mean briefly because I know people are going to have questions, but if we could just go through like Congregate Shelter, we have a startup cost, and what it is.
Yep.
How do you describe it?
Yes. So Congregate Shelter is shelter in a dorm style setting. It's where people don't have individual space. Usually it's bunk beds, either in a giant warehouse-like room or former warehouse-like room, or multiple bunk beds in smaller rooms. And so we took a look, when you compare Congregate Shelter and non-Congregate Shelter, the startup costs are very similar. And so we gave, under the Congregate Shelter row, an example of what it might take to purchase a facility. In the non-congregate row, an example of what it would take if a facility were leased. So you can see that for Congregate Shelter, to purchase something would probably run around $100,000 per household. it would take up to 5 years to develop. The annual operating costs would be up to $32,000. And so to serve one household over a 20-year period, and that's not the same household, that's one household per night for 20 years, it would cost up to $740,000. But from Congregate Shelter, only about a quarter of the people exit to a permanent housing solution. And one thing I will note is that we need to think about the temporary housing interventions for what they are, which is the point of them is to help people with the immediate crisis of being homeless. And it isn't necessarily the primary goal of those facilities to help people become housed, although they try and they are resourced to try. But until we have enough housing inventory, and for folks who need a higher level of service and support, more after shelter resources like subsidies and ongoing case management, it wouldn't do much good to throw buckets and buckets more. We won't see significant improvement in rates of exit to permanent housing by throwing buckets of money at the shelter operations alone. We also have to invest in how people are served after the shelters. And I think the other thing to note about congregate shelters, and I promise I will move faster through the rest, but I was using this as an example, is that congregate shelters are our most difficult beds to fill. People want privacy and they want to feel safe, and sleeping in a large dorm with a bunch of strangers, even with really caring 24-hour staff there, doesn't always feel that safe or private at all. And so when we try to fill congregate shelters, if we had a choice to fill a congregate shelter or a shelter with a bunch of tiny houses, I think we could fill the tiny houses a whole lot faster than we could fill any congregate shelter. Non-congregate shelters are shelters where the structure of the shelter is more private space. So individual bedrooms or hotel rooms or tiny houses are types of congregate shelters. And then the data points are the same on each type of program. So running a shelter or temporary housing intervention out of a motel or hotel is pretty low cost. There really are no startup costs. It all goes into paying the nightly hotel rate. But it is exactly what it is. And it can be done in a couple of ways. It can be done by a provider renting a hotel room by the room, or what we have done in COVID, and the reason we've been able to stand up so many motels so fast, is to do a lease with a motel for a number of rooms at a fixed rate over a period of time. So leasing 45 rooms from pick a motel for $90 a night, which saves us in terms of cost and also the reliability and consistency of being able to operate the program. Rotating faith-based shelters, this next row, is just that. Several faith-based organizations have opened their doors to running a shelter program, and they run in a variety of ways. Most of them are rotating, so each church or faith-based facility will open their doors for a month at a time usually, and then the shelter population stays at that location for that month and then moves on to another shelter location the following month. And there's an organized network. Some faith-based organizations do this with groups of volunteers. Others work in connection with a community-based organization as the operator. Safe parking is parking spot is a fixed parking location for people who are unhoused and have a vehicle to park in a safe location and sleep overnight. Various safe parking programs have different lengths of stay. A lot of them allow 30-day stays that are reevaluated month after month. And almost, I think all of the safe parking that I know of in Santa Clara County now has case management as a service component. And then some of the safe parking is done at jurisdiction-owned parking lots. The city of Mountain View, the city of San Jose are great examples of that, where they have owned land and they're using it for safe parking. Others are churches or other private facilities that are allowing parking in their spot overnight. Right now, most of the safe parking sites are allowing 24/7 staying because of sheltering in place. Before COVID, most sites were operated overnight only. These three categories are really similar, but you can see that there are different price points to set them up. So microhomes are, when I'm thinking about a microhome, I think about this as like around 100 square feet. So one of the projects that's happening, that is underway right now, is the county is putting in a temporary housing program at the Civic Center, and it will have 100 square foot units for the sleeping and a community space. You can also do a similar type of thing with structures on wheels. This includes travel trailers, drivable RVs, and tiny houses built on trailers with wheels. And the reason to distinguish structures on wheels is that a lot of the code that regulates them is the vehicle code versus the building code or any shelter crisis ordinances. And then the third type in this section are tiny homes like shipping containers, modulars, tough sheds. This is probably something closer to the lines of 150 square feet or bigger, but not very large, like 300 square feet would be a palace in this category. And then I think it's important to note that in this category, as we think about these unconventional types of structures, it's important that we are looking at the structures and make sure that their construction is suitable for people's health and safety. So we wouldn't want to just purchase 50 tough sheds, brand specific, not because they're not great structures, but because they were built with materials that aren't meant for people to inhale the particulate matter that comes from them. Sorry, nerding out a little bit. This orange category is we are looking at permanent interventions. And when we say temporary interventions versus permanent interventions, the temporary interventions are all designed to relieve the immediate need of somebody who's unhoused to have a safe place to sleep. The permanent housing interventions are by design focused on putting people into a long-term housing situation where they can get housed and stay housed. So permanent supportive housing is long-term, time unlimited housing that comes with intensive case management and a rental subsidy. And the idea is that people are going to need this service indefinitely. And while there is work on hoping that their situation can improve and their stability can improve and their health can improve, we are not expecting that it will be anytime soon, and we are expecting that their service needs will be high for quite a while. For both permanent supportive housing and the next type, which is rapid rehousing, we can offer this in either a site-based model or a scattered site model. Site-based is where we have developed or rehabbed units at a multifamily housing project or development for the specific purpose of offering permanent supportive housing. And there are a number of units in that complex dedicated for that purpose. Scattered site means that we have a subsidy that is portable and that we would use that subsidy at a market rate unit anywhere in the community. So we offer that, we have that program type for, or that structure for both permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is an intense service intervention, but it's time limited. So we would have intensive case management and a rental subsidy, but the expectation is that the household being served wouldn't need services forever. Usually rapid rehousing programs have a 2-year time limit. And when we bring back the information to you about our coordinated assessment system and the VI STAT, we'll talk more about how we identify which of these might be the best housing intervention for an unhoused household. Within the permanent housing interventions, we also have transitional housing. Transitional housing has a similar 2-year time frame to rapid rehousing, but instead of starting out in the community in a unit, transitional housing is facility based. So we might have a single family home with a person in each bedroom, or a motel that's been converted to housing, or a non-congregate facility where people can stay and get supportive services for a couple of years. And at the end of that time, they have to move from that unit to another housing unit, their long-term housing unit, which is why you see the outcomes are lower than rapid rehousing, for example. And the idea behind transitional housing is that it shouldn't be for everyone, because why wouldn't we want to just put people in their permanent home? Why should we make them stay in a facility before moving somewhere else? But it does work well for certain populations, like folks who are fleeing intimate partner violence, youth and young adults who need more ongoing care to learn how to become adults. And then people who are in substance use recovery who want a more structured, sober living environment and don't want to just be put in their permanent house all by themselves, alone, right off. The last two, the next one is homelessness prevention. So this is looking at folks who are still housed, but at imminent risk of becoming homeless, and what can we do to help support them to stay in that unit or find a more affordable unit. Typically folks who have lost their job or had some health crisis that need some help to get over a crisis. And while that is typically the population, it's important to note that usually the population of folks served by homelessness prevention is really just a paycheck away from, if one crisis happens, it will send them into homelessness. And then the final category here is affordable housing without supportive services. And while that's not necessarily designed for people to be the housing for people who are unhoused, I think it's important to note and understand that if we had more affordable, below market rate housing, it would help a lot with homelessness prevention and people being able to live in this high cost community. So it's pretty low. You'll see the annual operating costs per household are pretty low. Most below market rate affordable housing has some on-site services like community events and staff. That is really reflective of the staff to run on-site services. So it might be community events or a staff person who has a familiarity with social work and can refer residents to support services throughout the community, things like that. So that is my speed race through the matrix. As I mentioned, there's a list of considerations for all program types. And then also this chart is all the same program types with all the number information put together for easy comparison.
Thank you, Hillary. That was I know a lot of information, and that's what we didn't spring on you last meeting. You're welcome. Because everybody looked like at the end like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to public comment, and then I'm going to come back to the group and for this part of the meeting, I know I only have you till 7:30 and it's almost 7. So what I want to be able to do is take public comment. I want to get your, any questions that people have that we need to get for clarifying. I do want to get a vote on the work plan tonight. So I'm going to ask you to, I know you all got to see it. There were only two, there's just been a minor change in the work plan, but also an addition on the date. So we're not going to review those. So if you have questions about those, you can ask about that as well. So I'm going to go to public comment. I'm going to ask the clerk to please call on each public commenter.
Our next speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good evening, everyone. Scott Largent. Not sure if this is public comment for the items we just discussed or the regular public comment. So if somebody can clarify that for me.
For the items that were just discussed.
Great, fantastic. So I am on cue with this one, Cindy. You guys called out HAF and Home First. Now I know there's some pretty heavy duty nonprofits that are supposed to be providing some type of outreach. Twice I have seen Home First out there with a backpack in 5 years. So I guess they're not going to the encampments in the places that I'm going with Robert Aguirre and Sean Cartwright and all the faith leaders. They're not there. Home First, I don't see them very often either. And I understand that right now we're trying to hire more people from the county to do these outreach programs, to go out there and actually talk to a mentally ill homeless meth addict. We're having problems even getting people hired right now. That is pretty shocking right now. We have a lot of retired social workers. Let me tell you an example. Richard Scott, wonderful man, okay, lives in Willow Glen, just does amazing things for the homeless community. He also got me basically in that van. He got me a job in Willow Glen. This man is dynamite, okay? He used to run your outreach teams 15 or 20 years ago, okay? This man's retired. He wants to help. Bring him in. He's got no criminal record, owns a home in Willow Glen. This man is a great man, but we won't do that. We pushed every activist out the door, okay? And that's why I'm a little frustrated with this committee here. Yes, I do throw the ball a lot. This stuff doesn't work. And I don't see success stories, and I keep saying it over and over again. 5 years of asking for drug treatment. And all you guys did was come after me, maliciously prosecute me, violate my civil rights, and try to throw me back in the gutter. That is disgusting.
Our next speaker is Sparky Harlan. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, this is Sparky Harlan, CEO of Bill Wilson Center. I wanted to talk a little bit about the mobile crisis response for behavioral health. The Behavioral Health Contractors Association has been working on developing a community-based mobile crisis response for behavioral health calls, similar to the Cahoots model in Eugene, Oregon. We've been working with 15 cities throughout the country in vetting how they do their community-based models. Part of it includes having a van where you go out and actually provide transport. We also are looking at providing an EMT along with a crisis counselor to do the response. And this is instead of the police. Behavioral health still has their teams and they pair up with the police, but we have been working for weeks on our own model. And we basically have just finished the initial draft, which shows how we can stand up a model for any population of 100,000. So any city could look at the model and we'll show you how to operate it. Cities could join together, and it's a 24/7 crisis response model that's been vetted by the community, by numerous people who have all said, we want the community to respond and pair it up with your mental health professionals. So we would go out and pick up a person, pick up a homeless person, bring them into housing or behavioral health services, but we would be the point of contact. Cahoots, 60% of who they see on the street are homeless. So this is also a homeless outreach in addition to in-home response for people having mental health issues. So anybody who would like a copy of our model, we're willing to share it anytime you ask for it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robert Aguirre. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Yes, Robert Aguirre. I would like to suggest some other things that maybe you guys haven't talked about, but I'd also want to say that other cities besides San Jose need to get involved as far as having a safe place for people to stay, especially with what we've got going on with COVID and the last dealings that we had with the smoke. The people that are outdoors were not really provided enough shelter spaces for them. And I know that we have the two places here in San Jose, but places like Campbell and Milpitas and other cities that are around San Jose that have not been able to provide safe places for people. And I applaud the housing department for bringing in porta potties and hand washing stations and even dumpsters, and that program needs to be expanded, not just within San Jose, but also throughout the entire county. Also, I'd like to suggest that we have training, much like the training that the county puts on to allow people to learn how to do interaction with people for suicide prevention. It would be great if we had programs where people could get training on how to go out into the encampments and actually meet with people. For the most part, most of the people that are living outdoors are actually quite friendly if you approach them the proper way. And we can also allow them to be able to share their stories with people, which for the most part they are willing to do so that we can break down this myth that exists about the people that are living outdoors, and things like how they bring crime, or they bring disease, or they bring all these other different things that people are saying, dropping down the value of their homes, things like that. We need to do much more public outreach to prove how that is a wrong way of thinking.
That concludes our speakers, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I want to thank our public speakers. I'm going to go right to my colleagues and see what thoughts and questions they have. We're going to go to Jerome, then Kelsey, and then Lucas.
So like I was wondering about why there's no like sanctioned encampment, like I don't know, maybe thought or idea placed on that, because these are ideas like that seem to take a lot of lead time, to come to fruition. And I don't know if we're looking for like immediate solutions or anything like that, because I mean, I don't know, about the 5-year plan to end homelessness. I don't know how many like reiterations that's gone through, but it's like, yeah, we need more affordable housing, but it's like something that's been going on for years and years and years. And a lot of the cities, haven't been pushing like to have affordable housing units built in their cities, and then, or having contractors or developers pay an in lieu fee to not include affordable housing units in their apartment units. So it's like, you're making up for things you're making up for past mistakes by, trying to address homelessness now. But it's like homelessness is like, the issue of affordability of housing is one of the things that is driving this. And, because there's a lot of cities that don't want permanent supportive housing or, any type of housing program in their neighborhoods, because they think like home values will go down, but home values, most people that live in like nice neighborhoods got wealth through the appreciation of their homes, or there's a lot of tech people that got wealth through stock options and things like that, but not regular workers weren't able to, take advantage of a lot of things. But it's like a lot of people that don't want individuals that are homeless in their neighborhoods kind of lucked out. It's like your house just appreciated. If you have a house in Cupertino, you got it in 1980, you bought it for $50,000, and all of a sudden your house is worth $2.5 million or something like that. It's like that, the cities were benefiting from the appreciation and the values of their homes going up, but I feel like the cities weren't, focused on making everyone be able to afford to live in the same neighborhoods. So, I'm just wondering about the sanctioned encampment option though.
All right, Hillary, can you respond to that briefly? I don't know where Hillary went.
I'm here.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, I think that, I don't have we can certainly add what we think the cost of operating sanctioned encampments would be. I think philosophically, I certainly hear you, Jerome, that we need to act fast and provide people with more support and more needs. But I think that we want to get people as much indoors as we can. And I think that there are a lot of concerns with operating sanctioned encampments. One of which is it's hard enough to get community support for some type of structure even. So I think that we see it as potentially really difficult and the same amount of time to get support for something like a sanctioned encampment.
But Hillary will add it because it should be considered by the group. Yes?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Kelsey, and then Lucas, and then Anthony, and then Antonina.
Hi, I just had a couple quick clarifying questions. So the first is, in terms of how you define a congregate shelter, in places where it's 2 to a room, is that considered congregate or non-congregate? And then I was also just kind of dubious about having the same rate of return to homelessness for congregate, non-congregate, and rotating shelters of 24%. So just wanting clarification that is like, is it just kind of looking at shelter data altogether, or is that actually a breakdown and it's just exactly the same for the different categories of shelters?
Hillary?
Sure. So I'll start with the second question about the rates of return to homelessness and the rates of exit. Those numbers are all based on our system performance for emergency shelter programs. We really didn't start, we've always known that shelters operate in dorm style settings or individual rooms, but using the nomenclature congregate versus non-congregate, we didn't really give much thought to until COVID, and really started to use it because of how we needed to think about opportunities to quarantine and isolate people and the distancing requirements that we needed to have between beds. So before, we would talk about them as like a shelter with individual rooms versus a shelter in a big dorm. And so to answer the question of, and so that's why all of the data rates are based on just the community look at emergency shelter. And then to answer the question about whether 2 people in a room would be congregate or non-congregate, I think it depends on the context. I think if we were thinking about it in a COVID context, I would think about it as congregate, as in people of the, and I'm thinking about 2 people who aren't of the same household, for example, like 2 individual strangers who we had a double bedroom for and put them in, versus like a couple staying in a room.
Thank you. Lucas?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and. There we go. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and
lower your hand.
Recommendation. It's all good. And then I'll make a quick comment, then conclude with a question if that's okay. So I'll formally move the recommendation and just share that my preference would be to focus on those elements over which we actually have control. I appreciate the suggestion to include Caltrans, but I I'm a little hesitant because there is no accountability to anybody participating in this task force. And I don't feel like it's a good use of our time to include parties that haven't really demonstrated an ability to respond quickly to, I think, the urgent needs that we're identifying here. Instead, I think the suggestion to focus on land use is in my opinion, that's the priority because we have control. You know, we are the land use authorities for our respective cities. And I think it would be a grave error to not spend a lot of time focusing on land use. So, you know, I'm thinking at the conclusion of this, what I want to be able to bring back to my council are, you know, recommendations for land use, you know, regulatory changes that are based on, you know, county recommendations and the sort of the lived experience of shelter providers or housing developers who are encountering obstacles in working in our cities, and then say, here's what we need to do if we're serious about, you know, rapidly increasing interim housing supply or emergency shelter beds, safe parking, whatever it is, here's what we need to do. And then coupled with that, a program where we are proactively identifying sites for emergency shelter and interim housing. That's what I would like to end with at the conclusion of this. Because that's where we can actually be helpful, I think, as partners in this effort. The question I want to conclude with is, so my colleagues in meetings where we're discussing homelessness, you know, will often focus on the responsibility for funding these programs. And I think there are differences of opinion, and it would be helpful, for, you know, for, I guess, from the county staff perspective, for those of us representing cities to understand what does the county fund and what does the county expect the cities to fund, and how can we improve, I think, the communication or the expectations from the county on city partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Just two things that I want to say is that when you made a motion, did you make a motion for A, B, and C? A being the discussions that we've had today, B being the work plan, and C being the new adjusted date for our last meeting, which is moved to October 15th.
Yes.
Thank you. So we have that motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Rod.
Thanks, Rod. Let me just respond to the last piece first. Of course, I think that's a great product to have, to take a look at land uses and what each city can do. And over the next couple of meetings, when you look at the work plan, we're going to dive deeper into what each city's role can be. As it relates to what the county funds, I would be delighted, and we can add that into one of our final meetings, and they may just need to be a little longer so we can really chip down at these things. But I think in the end, what we want is the group to come to consensus about some top priorities, and for the leaders of this committee to go back to the cities that they're from, whether they're council members or they live in those cities, to have a conversation with those cities about what role they can play and how we get aggressive as a region instead of just a few cities. I mean, we want to see lots of activity, and that's why Dave asked us to get to it. What you'll notice is this is a really compressed work timeline, because the board is really interested in understanding what's available. And I want to just add one other thing. I think Reagan made a great point, which is, as part of COVID-19, there's some opportunities that have gotten created, and the window's going to shut. So we are hustling. So this next meeting, because we've already timed it out, we'll leave it shorter on Saturday. But I think the last two meetings are going to have to be a little chubbier, longer. All right. Okay, great. We have a motion and a second, and I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go to Anthony, and then to Vice Mayor Smith. Oh, and then Antonina, I'm sorry. So Anthony first, go ahead.
My first question is for Hillary. I wanted to ask about your permanent supportive housing segment you put in there. As I understand it, we have 3 permanent supportive housing sites in San Jose right now. Is that, and they're all running and built by 3 different developers and 3 different agencies, right? how is it? How?
I think that we have more than 3.
Yeah, go ahead, Anthony. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish your question, and then we'll figure out how to respond to it. Sorry about that.
But I was wondering how 3 different places that are supposed to be the same thing, permanent supportive housing, are run entirely different. I mean, with sets of rules that are different. And we look at 2nd Street Studios, the place on Monterey, and then the Park Center downtown. And all 3 of them, and this is me talking to tenants and the operators, have 3 different sets of rules. And I'm wondering how that doesn't violate, 1, the Fair Housing Act, some of these rules, and then 2, the civil liberties of the tenants themselves. I mean, like some of these rules, like I believe supersede state rules. Like you can't have visitors the first 5 days of the month. And so like, I'm wondering who is in charge of actually overseeing the uniformity of permanent supportive housing and the metrics that are of the programmatics there.
Thank you, Anthony. Hillary, can you respond to that? And I think
Sure.
the main question here is not the number, it's the rules.
Yes. So when the county, for example, is involved in a permanent supportive housing unit, we are usually involved in a couple of ways. One is through the development process, sometimes through funding. And in that funding, if we give Measure A funding, for example, in the development agreement, we work a lot on what the expectations are going to be for tenant selection and things like that. And then the other way that we work with permanent supportive housing is through the provision of intensive case management services. And so the county contracts with community-based organizations and has some county staff who provide intensive case management at permanent supportive housing sites. But then within the development, in addition to the intensive case manager, the developer usually contracts with a property manager. And so there could be differences between different sites in terms of how different property managers set up the site operations in partnership with the service providers. So I think that in terms of the differences, that's how the differences come about. In terms of the standards for permanent supportive housing, we focus a lot on the supportive services and the level of service that's offered. We have started doing more work with developers and property managers on site operations, but really the focus would be trying to help people stay housed and yet follow property management best practices. And then also thinking about making sure that there are no violations of anything, any legal obligations or requirements. And then how we can address those if we note any of those.
And Anthony, I think that's if that didn't didn't suffice, what I'm gonna recommend is that Anthony, that you and Chad have a discussion with Scott, and that way we can hone in on the specific areas that you're concerned about and work with Hillary and others on them, okay?
Sure.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna go to Antonina and then to Nancy and Brian.
Thank you. One of the, I think it was mentioned a couple of times or in this conversation, but one of the issues that cities will come up against is the community where you're going to be placing or expanding these facilities. And I've seen it many times that the neighborhoods come out and against them. But one of the council members in San Jose, Councilmember Deb, put together a neighborhoods agreement, and she got all the stakeholders together, which would be the people who are excuse me, the people who are in the neighborhood, as well as those who can be using the facilities. And then when that was brought up about, I think it was mentioned, crime in the neighborhood, they brought in the police. When they said, it was a library that was being used as an overnight warming location. They said, but our library is going to be decimated. Well, they brought in librarians, or they brought in somebody from the library. They brought in the Parks and Rec, because I think they were managing the place. The point is that if you wanted to have a smooth sailing as best as possible to put these and expand these facilities in neighborhoods, to put them in the neighborhoods, there needs to be an outreach to the neighbors themselves to calm their fears, or to recognize them and also work with them. And I just wanted to put that out there. And there's a couple of examples that's happened in San Jose where, like I said, it was Deb Davis's, Councilwoman Deb Davis's area, that they've had facilities and they brought in these neighborhood agreements.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Vice Mayor. Nancy, sorry, I'll narrow it down.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So before I'm hoping that you can help clarify for me what we are voting on. So
we're receiving a report. We're gonna vote on the work plan, and we're just voting on that change of date that you requested. I think it was you, Nancy and Andy, that we were moving from whatever the first October date was to the October 15th date.
Okay, so regarding the work plan, I have some questions about it.
Sure.
The 15th is a Thursday, so that's fine. My questions are, so in response to strategy 3, I'm looking, I think it's at slide 10 in the handout. It says, guided by the community plan to end homelessness strategy 3, the task force recommends a package of emergency solutions for the unhoused that can be implemented as soon as possible. And so then if I look at strategy 3, it's number 1 is the temporary beds, but then 2 through 5 or more social. And the framework is very much more related to item 1. So I'm wondering, to what extent does our work plan incorporate the softer side of things? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
So we're going to focus our attention highly on number 1, but number 1 won't be successful without your feedback on all the other items. As we talked about today, they're really integrated. So we're going to focus on item 1, but we want to get input on all of these items.
So would this be the appropriate time to recommend maybe more integration with the county hospitals? And also, see, the way I would view this is that, and maybe you can tell me if this could be accommodated in what we're approving. So say that the cities decide to, that we need to sanction encampments just to meet the needs of no toilets and no showers and that kind of thing. So say is that added already, or do we need to make a motion to add that?
You don't need to add it. I mean, just a few minutes ago, we talked about having behavioral health come. I mean, I think this is very broad. And so we kept it broad so that you have the flexibility to give us thoughts and ideas along the spectrum of item 3.
Okay.
Focus 3.
Okay. Great. So then item 3. Okay, great. So then what would it take to add in coordination with the hospitals? Because my concern is that
if you can refine it, Nancy, if you say, here's what I specifically mean, we can add the idea anywhere in the spectrum, and we can also have them come and present. I just need you to refine it from hospitals to.
So I'll refine it to, I've heard several instances of, I'm going to use the word dumping. I mean, that's a terrible word, but the Sunnyvale Community Services people were sent a person with an opened wound who from one of the hospitals, and were not necessarily equipped or notified this individual was going to arrive. And there have been people with broken legs left at our library. So it's just that I get that people are overloaded, but my concern is that we need some coordination, you know, to handle people with mental health issues and people with, you know, serious medical issues.
Great. We'll have someone come from the hospital and talk to us.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then secondly, another technique is, I know that this committee goes through next June.
I don't know. It doesn't. It has I think our last meeting is October 15th.
Okay. So yeah, in the motion, okay. All right. So that's pretty fast. Is there going to be any, I guess, is the outcome of this very tactical, and could we spin up something that's maybe a bit more strategic to make sure everything's working together over the course of time? Or is that the thing?
You know what, Nancy, here's what I would say.
Okay.
Let's get we got to get one job done. And that is that the board really wants the input of everybody here about what we should prioritize, and therefore what can be prioritized in our city, and therefore what can we fund. The issue about having an ongoing task force, that may make a ton of sense. It may make sense that there's a regular way to check in. There could be any number of next steps, but I really want to let the committee have a couple more meetings before we talk about what those could be, only because I think that could change.
Okay, that is completely fair, and I will be supporting the motion. Thank you for accommodating my concerns.
I know, of course, we want everybody's concerns to be accommodated. So Brian and then Anthony. And again, Anthony, it looks like you're getting the last word. Well, and we're gonna have public comment, and then we have to vote. So it's not the exact last word, but close enough. Oh, did I get everybody? Brian, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is as per that framework matrix. I don't know if it's possible to maybe add another column to that. As has been said here, land use is the common thread through all of this. And I think these are really good solutions, but I can't help but think that any one is the appropriate one that's going to be that silver bullet. So I'm assuming there's going to be a handful of things, and it all goes back to that land use. Can you put that? The example would be, we all agree non-cognitive shelter is going to fill 80% of the homeless. And so we really need those. But if there's only 2 parcels that can really accommodate that, then that is only, a tiny piece for the whole. So is there a way or some kind of follow-up, has research been done in terms of what parcels are available, what kind of these shelters can be put on those, so that we know if there is or some kind of a recommendation of priority for these, since I'm assuming your staff has done a lot more of this and more knowledgeable about that. I go back to, we agree this one thing is going to be a really good solution, but we can only do 2 of them because that's all the land use there is.
I don't think, let the staff noodle on that issue. I think they left the last column to include land use as kind of an overall challenge. But I'd like to give some thought, because I don't think we know where all the opportunities are, either public or private sector. I wouldn't assume that work's been done. The county, it's taken us quite a long time to do an assessment of the land that we own. It took, and to put it in a database. I'm embarrassed a little bit to say that when we got here, I asked for it because I thought that I had the same thought you did, Brian, and it took us 3 years to collect it all, get it in an organized fashion. I don't know if everybody has that. I don't know if everybody has it in the sense that they can say, this land is good for this and this land's good for that. Some cities I recognize, especially smaller cities, it may be more finite, but not in all cities. But let me just let the staff wrestle a little bit with how to address that, because I think that's a really good point. And it actually speaks to the point that Lucas raised earlier as well. So let's wrestle on that. All right, Anthony.
One, I got 3 questions. One, I'd ask that staff bring back the recommendations around alternative shelters that was given at the last housing task force in 2015, to see what of those actually got implemented and which ones didn't, and why not. I'd also ask staff to reach out to City Teams Ministries to gather their information from them from a camping structure in Texas called Community First Village. City Teams had went out there this last year and was very excited about it. And I wanted to see what the pluses and deltas of that was. And also, I have a counter motion that we extend our meetings at least 3 to 4. And my reason for that is today alone, we just asked for to be brought back information, or I lost count at 4 different times about different types of things. And I feel that this group kind of picks up where the last housing task force left off. And while like nobody in bureaucracy appreciates nothing but 4 walls and a roof, we're still at that area where we have to come with interim solutions. And I don't think they're going to be salient ones are going to be found by compressing our time span.
So, Anthony, I'm gonna recommend that we have that discussion as part of our last meeting so that we can determine, because even if we were to say, let's have X number more meetings, I would want to take again another look at a work plan and say, here are the things that we most want to be able to accomplish. Because I think it's not necessarily the number of meetings, but it is the it's what it is that we're discussing. The other reason is that I'm interested in the October 15th deadline is that the county has our next budget discussions in November. And I think it's really important that we finish this discussion in time for those budget discussions. And they start at the beginning of November, and we're going to need time for staff to turn around whatever recommendations come from the committee so that they can be thoroughly, if there's any that we need to discuss, they can be thoroughly vetted and discussed as part of our budget. I think the points you raise about the outcomes of the last task force are a good one. And that makes a ton of sense to present what came out of that task force. A lot of what did come out of that task force was presented at the very first meeting because that's where the Measure A came out of, and the expansion of much of our services came out of those meetings. And frankly, our partnership with the Housing Authority as well. But I don't disagree that we may need more time together. I think we should just, if we can, hold that to the last meeting to discuss. And certainly I'm happy to ask staff to follow up with City Team to learn more about what they saw. What was it called, Anthony?
It's called it's called Community First Village.
Community First Village. All right.
I believe it's Houston, Texas, but I'm not sure, but I know it's in Texas.
Yeah, and we looked at some projects, like some opportunities in Texas as well. I don't remember what they were called, but that doesn't sound familiar.
I just Googled it. It's in Austin. It looks it's very interesting.
Good. Yeah, and maybe I can't remember where our staff went to go look. But Anthony, I hear what you're saying, and we'll take a look as we get closer to the end. So we're going to meet again on Saturday. We're going to do a roll call vote on this motion. Then we're going to go to public comment. And I apologize. I know we're a little over time, but I think this was a very good set of discussions. So thank you, everyone, for all the thoughtful weighing in. So could we have the staff do the roll call?
Member Jordan.
All right, aye.
Member Haraz.
I don't think I'm a voting member, but aye.
Thank you. Council Member Bybee.
Aye.
Mayor Stephen Scharf. Council Member Bracco.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Martinez Beltran.
Yvonne?
Council Member Rod Sinks.
Aye.
Council Member Dominguez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunez, Mayor Lawler,
Yes.
Mayor Constantine, Council Member Ramirez,
Yes.
Council Member Perales, Council Member Esparza,
Yes.
Council Member O'Neill,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Klein, Member Clark, Member Lee Clark,
Yes.
Member Reeve,
Aye.
Member Itare,
Yes.
Member Baines,
Yes.
Member Franklin,
Yes.
Member Sharp, Member Stepanoff,
Yes.
Member Cooper, Member Pham,
Yes.
Member King,
Yay.
Member Shaw,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Ellenberg,
Yes.
and Chairperson Chavez.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I want to just say, first of all, thank you to everybody. This was really a robust conversation. We're going to do one last thing before we see you again on Saturday. We're going to go to public comment. And then as a reminder, our meeting on Saturday is at 11. Am I correct about that? It's at 11 o'clock. Great. Thank you. And I appreciate you being flexible about Saturday. We wanted to make sure we weren't disrupting it, like that we were able to do it in enough times that the public could participate if they liked. So we'll now go to our last two public speakers under public comment.
Madam Chair, how much time would you like?
Let's do 1 minute each. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 1 minute to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good evening, everyone. Scott Largent. I guess I have to learn how to talk really, really fast to basically explain the issues. The homeless don't trust the people. All of the municipalities that are here on this board right now, from your city to your public works to your law enforcement, have bounced these people around for such a long time that the trust is gone. You've taken their property, their motorhomes, their cars, okay? And I was going to elaborate a little more on the civil rights issue and the civil machination that you're putting these people through, not through the criminal justice system, but you're not allowing me the time to put that out there. So someone like me has to then go out there with the PA system tomorrow and blast the county building to basically get this out, what's happening. Never should be 1 minute, okay? It never should be this way.
Our next speaker is Robert Aguirre. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 1 minute to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Okay, Robert Aguirre. Yeah, so 1 minute is really not very much time. And the 2 minute that you gave before also. Anyway, to the point, I think another thing you guys need to consider is a homeless court, or court for people that are unhoused, because so many of the citations that are written against people for either trespassing or litter, or even riding on the light rail without a ticket, all these things are just piling up on people and make it more difficult for them to be able to get the services they need, because they become barriers for them. And I think we need to look into more ways of opening up public transportation to people that are unhoused, so they can get to their appointments, get to different things that they need to get to. We need an expansion of the programs that we have of outreach, and as I mentioned earlier, a way to be able to train ordinary citizens to be able to reach out to that population and be able to help them and also educate the people at the same time while they're getting their training about the situation, and so we can change the attitudes of many, many people.
Thank
That
you.
concludes our speakers.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you very much. This was a very robust, thoughtful meeting, lots of great ideas, and we will see you Saturday. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.